Hey, Blake T. Wild here, and welcome back to The Ultimate Era. And this is actually the first Ultimate X-Men story that I'm covering not written by Mark Miller. Actual fans of Ultimate X-Men, what few there are, probably have noticed that I've decided to skip ahead to Volume 7, because I just cannot bring myself to talk about all the other ones, man. I just can't. So, here is a brief synopsis of what has happened since we last saw these mutant freaks. Return of the King. The Brotherhood plans an attack on humanity. Cyclops is alive, but at the bottom of a pit thanks to Wolverine. Forge has created a new machine to amplify Magneto's powers, but Shadowcat and the X-Men foil the Brotherhood's plans. In the end, the X-Men turn themselves over to the authorities and are pardoned, and Professor X is freed from Nick Fury's custody in the Triskelion. Betsy Braddock is also revealed to be alive, and after her consciousness passes to the body of a comatose Asian girl named Quanon. Then Brian Michael Bendis comes in. Blockbuster. This arc focuses on Wolverine as unknown assailants ambush him. Wolverine tries to learn the motives of his attackers with the help of Spider-Man and Daredevil. Wolverine learns that his attackers are ex-Weapon X members, and then he is saved by the X-Men. The assailants kill themselves rather than reveal further information. Later, a SHIELD attack force arrives and reveals that the Weapon X team members are only flunkies in a larger, more insidious anti-mutant conspiracy. New Mutants. The first 3 issues of this arc are standalone introductions of individual characters, including ultimate versions of Angel, Jude, the Entropic Man, and Dazzler. Meanwhile, the government has Emma Frost create a mutant team. She recruits Alex Summers, Dazzler, Karma, and the Beast. At the team's kickoff, however, a Sentinel attacks and is defeated by the X-Men, but not before Beast is seemingly killed. And the most interesting thing that sort of carries over from, I think, any of that I just spoke about is the Ultimate Beast, who was out of the book for nearly 4 years before he was brought back in Robert Kirkman's run in Ultimate X-Men 81, in which it's revealed that he was actually resuscitated at a hospital and then taken in by SHIELD to the Triskelion and put to work. And Xavier knew this and worked with Fury to telepathically control Beast into believing that he was still making contact with his friends and family because they needed him to work on a cure for, like, the legacy virus or something like that. Then he's actually killed a year after that in Ultimatum. But as we have established, Ultimate Beast is the cause of that, so who cares? Released in 2004, written by Brian K. Vaughan with art by Brandon Peterson, this is Ultimate X-Men: The Tempest. The book begins atop Stuyvesant High School in NYC. A young man stands on the edge of the building, sobbing, seemingly preparing to jump. Then Nightcrawler bamfs behind him. Why? Why would you send a guy who looks like a demon to save someone who might be suicidal? The obvious happens, and the young man screams and stumbles off of the ledge, but he's caught by Angel. Jean-Paul, aka Ultimate North Star, freaks out and demands that the mutant put him down. They return to the roof, and Nightcrawler and Angel learn that he wasn't gonna jump. He just comes up here to express his emotions and look out over the city. The X-Men apologize and introduce themselves, and Jean-Paul demands to know why they're here, then realizes he's a mutant. Jean-Paul, who's meant to be a sophomore, bemoans that first he's gay, now he's a mutie? Angel is put off by the slur and explains that Xavier found him using Cerebro and that they've been sent to invite him to the Xavier Institute for Gifted Children in Westchester. Jean-Paul says that he'd rather be ridiculed for being gay than segregating himself and persecuted as a mutant, and Nightcrawler tells him that it's not safe here for him, and Jean-Paul reminds them that their cohort Beast was just murdered in public, on televised broadcast. Then Jean reveals that his father is the Canadian ambassador who is acquaintances with Nick Fury, and the whole family were warned by Fury about the X-Men, and he sprints away, manipulating his molecules to jettison himself across the city. Back in Westchester, Wolverine and Colossus spar in the Danger Room, then Colossus suggests something. He wants Wolverine to cut him, to see how strong he really is. Wolverine tells him that these claws are no joke, and Colossus socks him across the room, and Wolverine rockets at him in anger. As headmistress of the Academy of Tomorrow, Emma Frost, and Charles Xavier, and these two used to be lovers, watch on. Emma panics that they're really going to hurt each other, but Xavier tells her to just relax. If they go too far, he'll shut them down. They're just dealing with the recent loss of Hank. Emma explains that Wolverine is a trained killer, and Rasputin has no idea what he's doing. Then Charles corrects her to his mutant name, Colossus. And Emma is shocked by this, because when she was his student, he made it a point to note that mutants should find ways to connect with humanity, not distance themselves from it. Xavier strokes his equally bald chin and heavily tells her that his curriculum has evolved, and that she doesn't know who he's become. Jerk! Emma tells him that she realizes he's also processing the death of Beast, but he's acting less mature than the two testosterone-drunk idiots in the danger room, and she can't help him or the school until he decides to grow up. She goes on to tell him that his students need a healthier environment right now. She's heading back to the Academy of Tomorrow in Chicago for a few weeks, and she'll take whichever students would like to come with her for that time. And Xavier simply tells her good luck finding volunteers, which has some pretty dark implications, don't you think? Coming from the man who can mind control his students into not wanting to go. I get the feeling this book is going in the Professor X is a Jerk playlist on my channel. A few hours later, Emma prepares her drive back to Chicago with the only person who decided to come, Alex Summers, aka Havoc. He thanks her for the opportunity as across the expansive yard, Jean and Scott watch him pack up. Jean asks if Scott's going to be okay and goes say goodbye, but Scott gets pouty because he and the professor invited his brother Alex with open arms, and he goes running off with her? She asks if he'd like to go for a walk, and then she mentally takes them to Scott's mind into the world of Corsair, a childhood fantasy that Scott imagined when he was 7 after his dad bought Empire Strikes Back on VHS. A world of high-tech and extensive military campaigns against giant monsters, robots, futuristic soldiers, and space pirates. He asks how she did this, and her eyes flitter with the Phoenix's energies. Elsewhere in the school, Bobby, Drake, and Rogue ice skate. Rogue's not great at it, and Bobby talks about the 27 Club. You know, the list of famous people who died when they turned 27. And then Kitty arrives and finds the pool totally frozen. Bobby explains he was teaching Rogue how to skate as she falls, and he reaches to help her, and Rogue freaks out, and Kitty just decides to leave and phases through the ground and heads downstairs. What level is this pool on? Anyway, Kitty heads through the hall back to her bedroom when she hears some weird noises coming from Storm's room. She tries the door, but it's locked, and then a loud crash sounds. Kitty faces through the door and finds Storm's room totally trashed, and Aurora's ragged voice groans for Kitty to leave. And she finds Storm in the midst of a mental breakdown. I know I shouldn't be laughing at this, but come on. She has cut her hair into like a porcupine and is wearing just dumb, punky clothes that she probably stole from Dazzler's closet. So yeah, because Hank is dead and she and Hank dated for a while, we officially have punker Storm debuting in the Ultimate Universe. And that night, somewhere in New York, Jean-Paul walks down the street when he runs into this tattooed giant. He instructs Jean to come over to him, and a red diamond glows in his forehead as his eyes shimmer crimson. And Jean is overcome and nervously enters the alley, and then he notices the man's tattoo, reading Sinister. And then Mr. Sinister whips out a handgun and fucking shoots him. But the bullet stops in place, and Jean Grey appears and tells him he's okay and explains who she is, and that she entered his mind to revisit this memory. And Jean reveals to Jean that the bullet grazed his lung and he's currently comatose at St. Vincent's Hospital in Westchester. She goes on that 4 other mutants were shot and killed from the same gun last night, but he was the only one who survived, and she's hoping to learn what the shooter looked like from his memories. Jean-Paul is scared to relive this all over again, but Jean takes his hand and they look into the face of Mr. Sinister. And in the hospital, Jean-Paul wakes up in a fright to find Colossus and Jean over his bed. Jean introduces Peter to Jean-Paul, who, high on painkillers and just waking up, jokingly asks if he's single. Peter's shocked because Ultimate Colossus is gay, but I think at this point he's still in the closet. But Jean tells him that they have to get to work, tracking down Mr. Sinister, and pulls him out of the room. And later in Midtown Manhattan, 2 NYPD inspectors inspect the murder scene of one of those that were killed. The older man makes a joke. What do you call 4 dead mutants? A good start! The younger detective tells him to shut the fuck up as Wolverine lingers outside the window listening in. The two eventually leave the crime scene of this 14-year-old murder victim, and Wolverine clambers inside, carefully picks up the bullet casing and gives it a sniff before he sneaks back out. Meanwhile, back at the school, Rogue is shot in the leg by Cyclops. He announces that she's dead and needs to get off the field as Angel soars overhead during their midterm exam. Angel notes how weird it is to do all this after what happened last night, which the Daily Bugle has described as a mutant massacre. Then he's hit by Iceman, and Iceman steals the dirty bomb from Angel. Bobby slides down to the ground and tries to make a joke, but forgets how it goes. And as he's thinking it over, Kitty phases through him and steals back the bomb and gives it to Cyclops, noting that those dang terrorists lost again. But Cyclops points out that her powers would disrupt the electronics, and if this had been a real bomb, Westchester would now be a crater. So Scott gathers everyone around and tells them that he knows their heads are somewhere else after everything that's happened recently, but as soon as the professor gives the word, they will go after the people responsible. Then he tells everyone to get back into their places and go again. Elsewhere, Xavier telepathically meets with General Nick Fury. Fury tells him that this is a matter for local authorities to handle, not a federal defense agency. But Charles tells him that S.H.I.E.L.D. may be their only hope that the X-Men have in finding who was responsible for the attack. He tells Fury that they've discovered the man goes by the name Sinister, and seemingly has some kind of hypnotic powers. But for some reason, Charles is unable to locate him with Cerebro. Fury asks if that means he's not a mutant, and Xavier says that his abilities could be from some kind of genetic engineering. Fury asks what proof they have, because all the mutants were killed by a 45, which doesn't really prove anything other than it's not in his jurisdiction, or worry. Charles asks if he's forgotten all about Hank, McCoy, and that whole situation, and Fury shouts that no one's making Xavier send his X-Men into these situations, except for Xavier. He's the one who has to bear the brunt of what happens when these people die, or are believed to be dead, and how that affects the others. Fury says he has to get going, and tells Charles that he'll be in his thoughts, realizes what he said, and adds, not literally. Then he fades out, and Charles sits alone in the Cerebro unit. The next day, a horrible storm looms over the school in Westchester as Aurora floats over the roof in a zoned-out silence. Nightcrawler teleports onto the chimney and explains that Professor X is holding an assembly and that she needs to be there. She tells him that she wants to be alone. He sits down and tells her that he knows how much Beast meant to her, and Storm attacks that the reason he's always bothering her must be because he thinks she's only into furry blue freaks. Is Ultimate Nightcrawler fuzzy? I know the mainstream one is, but I never thought Ultimate Nightcrawler was as well. Anyway, he tells her that her pain is no excuse for cruelty. Ironic, considering what he does after he has a mental breakdown. He tells her that Hank wouldn't want to know that it took his death to turn her into a monster. Then he teleports away and the clouds begin to part. Not long after, in the newly named McCoy Memorial Hall, the X-Men all hang around as Storm appears in the door. Xavier welcomes her inside and reveals that for the foreseeable future, they will not be tracking down Sinister. In fact, none of them are permitted to leave the school's grounds at all. Everyone demands to know why, and Xavier explains it's because someone out there is targeting young mutants, and he does not want to put them in his crosshairs, and that this is better left to the police. Then Logan rocks up and tells him that the most cops don't want to find the killer because they're fine with less mutants in the world. He recounts to Xavier again what he recounts to Xavier what he learned from the crime scene. Nothing. And Wolverine tells him that the guy is not human and he's practically invisible. He can barely track him as is. Rogue asks how they're supposed to find Sinister, and Logan tells him the old-fashioned way. Following leads, pounding pavement, and kicking down doors. Xavier relents and informs Logan that this will only be a mission for senior class members. They'll be splitting into teams, Cyclops and Colossus, Marvel Girl and Nightcrawler, Wolverine and Storm, searching uptown, midtown, and downtown respectively. And elsewhere, Sinister cleans his handgun as an ethereal voice speaks to him, informing Sinister that they would have had 5 sacrifices had it not been for his carelessness. Sinister apologizes to his lord and proclaims that he will deliver the other 6 innocent souls very soon. And his forehead crystal begins to glow, and Sinister bows, pledging himself once again to Lord Apocalypse. The next day, the lower classes of the X-Men fight the Brood in the Danger Room, then Dazzler drunkenly stumbles into the simulation, much to the chagrin of the others. And later that night, the search party begins their search of the city for Sinister. Jean and Nightcrawler overlook East Harlem as they talk about Scott. Then Sunspot appears and laughs that he's finally able to go up against the X-Men on his own turf, and he just starts fucking opening fire on Nightcrawler. Then Jean uses her Phoenix powers to disrupt his own flame powers, and Roberto da Costa falls back onto the roof and explains that he's been looking for the freak who's shooting up mutants. Jean explains that they're doing the same and asks why he's attacking them. And it's never explained. This makes no fucking sense why this happens. Roberto asks where they were when bigots torched his whole apartment building after Magneto attacked the White House, or when his mutant friend was nearly beaten to death by a mob. Then he powers up and leaves, and explains that real mutants of the world don't need the X-Men. Meanwhile, Cyclops and Colossus are in a firefight with the Russian mob, and Colossus grabs one and demands to know if they have been selling unregistered 45s. And Boris, the ringleader, tells him that they stopped selling those things years ago, as he holds Cyclops at gunpoint. Colossus pleads with Boris to let Cyclops go, and Boris notes that the X-Men took his best guy, and it's only fair that he do the same. Then Cyclops fires his beam, reflects it off of Colossus's giant forehead, and slams it back into Boris's face. And Peter stares in shock, and Peter asks if he knew that would really work or not. Meanwhile, in the East Village on St. Mark's Place, Storm and Logan walk down the sidewalk. And Storm finally speaks, and she thanks Logan. He asks her what for, and she explains that ever since Hank, she feels like everyone's been trying to fix her, urging her to move on, just get over it. But Logan's actually let her mourn and work through it on her own pace and hasn't tried to push her. Logan says he's not someone who can judge others, especially if she wants to give herself a shitty haircut and dress like street trash. She's put off by this, but Logan tells her that she's not the first person to get stomped on by life, and places his hand on her shoulder and tells her he's sorry for what happened. They keep walking until they find a tattoo parlor, and he notes that the mental image Jean sent to everyone of Sinister looks like the work of someone that Logan knew that once worked here. Then they head in, and things do not go well, as next we see Wolverine snicks his claws and threatens to gut the tattoo artist on duty. The guy screams that he's not scared of some mutant freak, and Storm forms a miniature ball of lightning in her hand and threatens to use it on the dude. Then asks what would happen if she just happened to fill his lungs with a cloud of super saturated nitrates. And the guy spills everything he knows, that Sinister got a tattoo here, and that he actually lives right down the street. So Storm and Logan smash into the apartment, finding it empty. Although Storm does come across this, a strung-together effigy of Apocalypse, made out of clothes, paint, and a mannequin. Wolverine wonders what the fuck it's supposed to be, then he notices Sinister's wall of mutants, and he realizes why Sinister isn't home. And at the Xavier Institute, Charles sits and watches a massive feed of the security cameras when the door slides open. Huh? Check out the dirty old man spying on his underage students. Sinister. My reputation precedes me, huh? Well, I know a thing or two about you, Professor X. Lord Apocalypse has told me stories. Apocalypse? I'm afraid I don't know what you're... Oh, does the big bald baby think he can slip me a telepathic surrender order? 'Cause I got a few mind games of my own. Now be still and this'll be over with soon. Where are you taking me? To the one true enemy of the great Charles Xavier. Stairs! There it is! One of the most famous scenes in all of Ultimate Comics. Back in New York, the X-Men finish regrouping as Wolverine demands Cyclops hit the fucking gas and get them back to Westchester immediately. Jean tries to reach out to Xavier, but she can't telepathically find him. And back at the Institute, Xavier lies battered and bruised at the base of the staircase in the foyer as Sinister stands over him, explaining that Apocalypse shall complete his transformation once he kills Xavier and his X-Men. Then he whips out his handguns, and Iceman appears and freezes his hands. But Sinister forces his fingers to pull the triggers and blasts the ice off of him, hitting Bobby twice in the chest. Rogue runs in from the hall and Sinister fires twice at her, but nothing happens. And Rogue looks down to find that Kitty has made her intangible. Kitty pulls Rogue through the floor as Sinister begins his hunt. He heads up the staircase, but his guns are snapped out of his grip by the Angel. Angel notes that he thought he'd be scared of Sinister if or when he ever met him, but he realizes now he's just a jabroni coward hiding behind some guns. And then Sinister's diamond glows as he commands Angel to strangle himself. And Angel falls to the ground as Sinister laughs and mocks him. He walks over and inspects the massive wings when Dazzler launches him out of the fucking window. She poorly drops down to the ground and walks over to Sinister and prepares to blast her energy into his head when he grabs her wrist and wrenches her arm around and holds a knife to her throat. Rogue aims Sinister's gun down at him and demands that he let her go. Angel freaks out, and Rogue tells him that Sinister shot Bobby dead to the ground like a dog. Then Kitty phases through the floor and tells them that Bobby's ice actually absorbed the impact and he's fine. Dazzler cries out that she's still held hostage. And Sinister orders Rogue put the gun down or he'll tear the little girl's throat wide open. Angel pleads with Rogue to listen to him, but Rogue assures him that she was a crack shot growing up. And he grabs her shoulder to pull the gun down, accidentally making skin contact, and he cries out in pain as wings explode from Rogue's back and she soars out of the window in seconds and tackles Sinister and then flies him up into the night sky. Sinister stares into her eyes as his diamond glows, and he orders Rogue to crash. But Storm appears and snaps her out of it. Rogue socks him in the forehead jewel, and Sinister crumbles in her arms as Storm and she fly him back to the school. And a few hours later, as the morning sun crests over the horizon, S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives and detains Mr. Sinister and brings medical aid for the X-Men. Fury begrudgingly tells Xavier that his team did alright, and notes that S.H.I.E.L.D. has run the ballistics and found that the 45 Sinister brought matches the other murders. And Xavier asks who the hell this guy actually is. Fury reveals that their DNA tests found his name is Nathaniel Essex, a former bioengineer at an Oscorp subsidiary in New Orleans. And when he couldn't get permission to perform experiments on humans for his hypnotic persuasion and urban stealth programs, he did it on himself. And then he apparently started hearing and interacting with voices in his head and disappeared. Fury tells them that Sinister is about to disappear again into S.H.I.E.L.D.'s custody, and that he'll be back tomorrow to finish up some paperwork with the students, and he heads off. Aurora apologizes for the X-Men not being there, and that they shouldn't have pushed Xavier when he told them that they were meant to stay on campus. But Xavier says that he should be the one apologizing. It was he who was the target, and it was wrong of him to insist that they all stay here because they're no more safer here than they are out in the world. And sometime later, Sinister sits in his S.H.I.E.L.D. cell as Lord Apocalypse's voice mocks him, noting that he'll just have to find a new horseman. And Sinister pleads with his lord to stay with him, that he'll follow his every order. And Apocalypse appears in his cell and orders him to listen closely. The end. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. I think it was alright. I was pleasantly surprised at this total reworking of Mr. Sinister as a character. I actually always thought I would hate this version of him, but he's actually quite a threatening villain. And not just because he has a gun. He's threatening, he's jacked, he has some insane mental control over people. He's like that snake in the Jungle Book, but if the snake had a gun. And this is also Apocalypse's introduction into the Ultimate Universe, which is just such a confusing situation, because it's meant to be that we don't really know if he is real, he, whatever it is, but it's later revealed that it is in fact real, and he's actually a danger and a threat. But the entire existence of Ultimate Apocalypse is just so strange. And honestly, I don't think he's actually a mutant based on what we know, because mutants were specifically created in the 1940s after experimentation, and that was then released around the world or whatever. So he can't possibly be a mutant, at least in the way that we know and think of Ultimate Marvel mutants and how they work. So what is it? What is Apocalypse? Some other entity? Is he a mutant that just went batshit insane and, like, this is what his mutation is? Some fucking thought being that infests Nathaniel Essex's mind? If anything, I think it would be an interesting idea if it was similar to a situation of the MCU's version of Hive, which, if anyone's unaware, from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., highly recommend it. Hive is an ancient human that was transformed into an inhuman by the Kree, and his fucking power was that he became a horrible parasitic creature that inhabits dead humans and controls their bodies. That's how he thrives and lives. He's pretty much immortal, nearly. And I think something of that nature works really well, at least for Ultimate Apocalypse, because in a later volume, Sinister is ordered to kill himself in prison, and he does so, and shortly after, Apocalypse takes over his body and transforms it into the Apocalypse that we know, except he's red instead of blue. And in this book, there's just a fun, great reference to the original Apocalypse appearance, who is a shadowy figure, because the creators of the book didn't know what he was going to look like yet. So that's just a fun little carryover into this updated version of him when we first see him in Sinister's apartment. And I really like this. It was nice seeing a less edgier outing for the X-Men and this sort of natural evolution of the team and the school, which I still hesitate to call it that because at this point, it's really not a school yet. I know later they get more actual like student body characters, but at this point, it's getting there. It's more of a foster home than anything. But the newer editions of the X-Men are fun, and they add a unique sense and outlook. Let me know in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on my thoughts. And as always, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/Smokey's videos, where you get early access to videos when available. All of my comics posted in high resolution, along with my commentary for each page and notes and comments on how they came to be. And check out my Etsy shop, blaketwild.etsy.com, if you want to pick up the physical copies of my books. Every purchase comes with a free head sketch of any character of your choosing. And check out my podcast, the Comic Shtick Podcast, where comics are my shtick, and I Need Some Disney, where my Disney-obsessed wife and myself sit down to discuss everything Disney. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!